This video introduces Omar Khayyam and the Rubaiyat. Omar Khayyam, this guy, is the best-known Persian poet in the Western world. His works are alluded to in other works of literature like The Kite Runner, and he was even famous in his own lifetime as an astronomer, as a mathematician, and he was also a scholar of philosophy and medicine, so he was an all-around type of guy. His last name, Khayyam, means tent maker, which might have been from his father's occupation, but Khayyam himself was known for his academic pursuits and accomplishments. He was born in the Persian city of Nishapur, which is in Iran, and at the time it was the intellectual capital of Islam. In his 20s, he had written a scholarly work on algebra, and it caught the attention of the Sultan, who asked him to join a group of people to reform the Islamic calendar. And their work resulted in the Jalali calendar, which remains today the most accurate calendar in the world. It had been created, there was a need for it, because the original lunar calendars, which had 354 days, it was fine for desert nomadic people, but it no longer worked for settled agricultural people. It's quite a bit different. It gains about a day on the Julian calendar every 157 years. And you can see here kind of how it's set up. It's clearly based on strictly, the movement throughout the solar system, the way the Earth moves. And so you can see references to the zodiac. It's a zodiac-based calendar. And then it's kind of cool to see the way the days of the month are. And so overall, it's just kind of interesting to see an author who is currently recognized as being one of just the most amazing, talented poets today still, but also so appreciated within his own lifetime for the work that he did and the art that he created. So Khayyam used a very popular medieval Persian poetic form called the Rubai, and in plural that's the Rubaiyat, and it just means quatrain, 4 lines. In each of his poems, the first 2 lines introduce a problem or a situation. Now, it's not a problem like, someone's cheating on someone else or anything like that, and it might not even be anything that we actually recognize as a problem. But in the first 2 lines, we will see a situation, some kind of claim, some kind of statement. The third line is designed to create tension or surprise related to that situation. And then the 4th line is supposed to offer some form of resolution, and sometimes with a twist. Now, this isn't real obvious a lot of times. It's going to take a lot of interpretation and analysis from you to be able to see what it is he's trying to say. And it'll be a very interesting challenge for us. So one of the things that we need to know before we go into this is what's important in the culture of Islam. I mean, obviously, like I said earlier, where he's from was the intellectual capital of Islam at the time. Education was greatly valued, and exploring philosophy was very valued. But at the same time, throughout all their literature, you could see elements, especially relating to the 5 pillars of Islam, the 5 kind of fundamental aspects of the religion. So we're going to run through these real quick so that as we're reading literature throughout this region, you'll be able to recognize them as we go, and also it might help you kind of decode some of the things that Khayyam says in his poems. So the very first pillar of Islam is the creed, or the testimony of faith. And you'll notice that these 5 pillars, if you are familiar with any of the 3, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they all stem from the Judaic tradition. So you are going to recognize these elements from those religions. if you're educated in those religions. So the testimony of faith is often what's called a profession of faith. It's just claiming that, the God of Moses is the true God, that nothing else has the right to be worshipped but that God. And then theirs also includes that Muhammad is his prophet. The next pillar is the prayer. And Muslims perform prayers 5 times a day. Each prayer is fairly brief. It doesn't take very long for them to perform. And they consider prayer to be a direct link between the worshiper and God. There's no one that comes in between those prayers. So their expectation is that while they're praying, they feel inner peace, inner happiness, comfort, and they feel kind of one with God. And so they do these prayers at dawn, noon, mid-afternoon, sunset, and night. And, I mean, it can be anywhere. Wherever they are at that moment is where they complete their prayers. The next pillar is giving alms. Or, wait, just kidding. Alright, so I'm sorry. The next pillar is fasting during the month of Ramadan. Every year in the Islamic calendar, there's a month dedicated to Ramadan, which is where they fast from dawn until sundown. They abstain from food, from drink, from pretty much kind of cutting themselves off completely from any worldly comfort. And they feel like that fasting helps them gain sympathy with those who go hungry, and it helps them grow in their own spiritual life. So this month is really a time for them to consider, the wonderful things that they do have in their own lives. It gives them a chance to be kind of introspective and, become more spiritual. The next pillar is the pilgrimage to Mecca. And the annual pilgrimage, well, first of all, at Mecca, I mean, there are constantly visitors there. But while it's always filled with visitors, the annual pilgrimage is performed during the 12th month of the Islamic calendar, and about 2 million people make it to Mecca each year from all over the world. You're expected to go. It is considered an obligation once in your lifetime for anyone who's physically and financially able to get there. The male pilgrims wear simple clothes, and so if you ever look at pictures, you just see everyone wearing white, and it's so that there's no distinctions between class and culture, so everyone truly there is standing equal before God. And it's the pictures are beautiful. At the annual pilgrimage, they circle around this small center building, and as the circle moves, they're really winding inward, getting closer and closer to it so that they can touch it. And it's a mosque there that's in the middle. That is what Muslims turn towards when praying. So there is a direction, that no matter where in the world they are, when they pray, they're always praying towards Mecca. And so now the last pillar on this picture is giving alms or showing support for the needy. Now there are rules about like how much, like percentage-wise, actually must be given to the needy, but they also do encourage, just giving as much as you can and as much as you please as voluntary alms or charity. They believe that their possessions are purified by setting aside a small portion for people who need it. And they kind of look at it like when you prune a plant, when you cut back, it kind of balances everything out and encourages new growth. So here's a nice little review for you for the 5 pillars. The creed is their profession of faith. The prayers that they do 5 times a day encourages closeness to God, feels very personal. Fasting increases empathy for others who don't have as much. The pilgrimage is the obligation to visit their holy site. It's also, there's a lot of lore behind it, stories from their sacred texts, from the Quran, and some relation to like circling the building 7 times and going into it relates to one of the stories from one of their books. And the almsgiving, which is giving charity to those in need, and it encourages growth in your own faith and appreciation for what you do have. And also, they believe that it increases appreciation for what God has done for them. So one of the things that always needs we kind of need to keep in mind, between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, it is the same God. It's the God of Abraham. That's how he's referenced in the Old Testament. And while Jews use like the Torah, the Old Testament, Christians use the Old Testament and the New Testament, Muslims use the Old Testament, New Testament, and the Qurans. And then there's a couple of additional books that vary from denominations within Islam, with the hadiths and stuff like that. So they are very similar religions, but with very obviously important differences between them, which is what makes them different. So let's take a really quick look at one of the Rubaiyats that you'll actually have to deal with. So they're extremely short. Like I said, a rubai just means quatrain. There's only 4 lines. So that means that there is a ton packed in to these 4 lines. Now, the Rubaiyat themselves had disappeared for a long time. No one really heard much of them, knew where they were, especially outside of Persia. But in the mid-1800s, copies of Khayyam's verses were discovered in England, and Edward Fitzgerald translated them because he was struck by how beautiful they were and the emotional depth that they had. So, even within, just these tiny lines, there's so much symbolism and, cultural aspects included. And so we're going to do little mini TP casts with each poem. So obviously there's not a title included. So we're really just doing the center portion. We're really just doing this part. We're looking at paraphrasing, the connotation, the author's attitude, any shifts, which there always are some, especially since, in the structure itself there is little twists, little surprises, and then the theme, and each one will have a theme. So, within the seed of wisdom did I sow. So, to paraphrase, I tried to plant wisdom in people, and with my own hand labored it to grow. I worked to teach them, and this was all the harvest that I reaped. Here's what I got from it. I came like water, and like wind I go. And this one, to me, seems a lot harder to paraphrase, but, let's see. For now, we'll say, just, I came and went. And perhaps when we get into the connotation, we can break it down a little bit better. So the first thing that I noticed for the connotation portion is that we have things that are capitalized. So for seed of wisdom, to think, just to kind of like run with what I'm thinking, we often hear like, you plant seeds, you reap the harvest. So this is giving a little bit of maybe pastoral imagery, and it's associating it with wisdom. And so I'm thinking of knowledge. We know that he focuses on philosophy. And then we also see just an overall value here of teaching others. And the next line, and with my own hand labored it to grow, it is still kind of continuing the value of teaching. and sharing information with others. And this was all the harvest that I reaped, so he's continuing here with his kind of pastoral connection to teaching or to wisdom. So maybe that's kind of telling us that, having wisdom or helping others gain wisdom is, the key to a simple life or an appropriate life. And so now we get into this last line, which to me seems just so challenging. Again, we have capital letters, so the water and the wind might be kind of personified here, or at least they're considered very important. And so I'm also noticing that this is in quotation marks, and so I'm wondering, who is it that's saying this? And is this Khayyam himself saying these things? Is this his reflection on trying to teach people wisdom? It clearly doesn't sound like he had an easy time doing it, because we have words like labored, and we have this whole association to planting and harvesting, which is not an easy task. So I kind of get the feeling from words like labored, sowing, reaping, that there is kind of a connotation of challenge associated with teaching. So just making a note. And so if it's him saying this, if it's the teacher, then it kind of makes it sound like it's a complaint. Well, this is all that I got from it. I came like water, and like wind I go. But we need to kind of try to figure out what this can mean. So, whoa, things got crazy. Okay. So water is, flowy. I often think of like renewal and being fresh and clean. So maybe he came into the situation, refreshed, ready to go, and then like wind, on a windy day, we look kind of toe up and kind of rough and pushed around. So rough, disheveled. And so if I'm thinking that he had to work really hard to do this and he didn't really get much out of it and he didn't make much of an impact, then that would kind of make sense. He came in, it kind of makes me think of like a new teacher. They come in all like happy about their classroom and they're so excited to teach their new kids. They're ready to just try anything. And then by the end of the first week, they're all, beat up and like, this is not what I thought it would be. So roughed and pushed around. So obviously, on your own, you might have gotten a totally different aspect out of this. You might have gotten a whole different interpretation. To you, this might be exceptionally positive, and that, the water means that you're blank, and then the wind means that you have experience, and so you've gained wisdom from the situation. There are so many ways that you can interpret information from this. So don't feel limited just because what someone else comes up with is different than what you came up with, because in fact, the Rubaiyat have been translated into so many different languages from its original, and each translator put their own kind of perspective on the translations. Obviously, with this much kind of symbolism and this much compact language, whatever it is that you're thinking is happening in the poem is going to affect how you translate it. And there's a lot of disagreement on it, and there's a lot of people that blame the guy, Edward Fitzgerald, the guy that translated this one. They're saying that, he kind of went a different direction. He went a more negative direction with it, but he kind of buffered that negative attitude a little bit so that it wasn't as harsh as what it originally was. There's just so much stuff. So you just kind of run with your interpretation, and as long as you see that it's staying consistent, then you feel like you can justify it. Okay, so I kind of already started covering the author's tone according to the way I did my connotation. The author's attitude or the author's tone, he sounds a little tired. He sounds a little disappointed from the amount of effort he put in and the amount that he got out of it. So maybe a little aggravated with wasted effort. And I feel like I can support that pretty well. And the very last thing that we need to do is the theme, which is a statement of the lesson learned. And while I feel overall the attitude on this was a little more negative, a little discouraged, there's still the value that he did try to teach wisdom. And even though he's disappointed with the outcome, he still initiated that attempt, and so I feel like it's important. So the theme that I came up with is modeling wisdom to others is important, but it won't always be effective. And so that's my mini TP cast for this poem. A couple of points for us to pay attention to. His use of enjambment. Enjambment is when the lines run on without any punctuation. Oh, and I totally forgot shifts on the other one. That's adorable. So to find shifts, these two lines clearly are punctuated a little bit differently, but the shift that I see is right here in this last one, this last line. We have an explanation of how hard he's working up here. So in these lines, he's working hard, trying to plant that wisdom. And then it changes to the result of his work. Sorry about that. I just blasted through it. Okay, so now we can look at this. So enjambment is when the lines continue, like a sentence continues without a pause at the end of lines. Now, in the one that we just looked at, every single line does have some form of punctuation. There is a pause. But in some of the other Rubaiyat, you might not be able to paraphrase line by line because the sentence itself, the thought itself, might go on to the next line. So you're going to have to be a little flexible and realize that the lines don't always stop, or each thought doesn't always stop at the end of a line. So you're going to have to pay attention to enjambment. The cultural references, you might have to Google some of these things. He references some of the buildings that are in his region that were really iconic. He references a lot of characters from mythology and stuff like that. So, be prepared to look stuff up if you don't know what it is that he's talking about. There's one poem that references Jamshid, and it's, we don't know who these people are. We don't know what he's alluding to. And so we need to look those up. And then again, tons of symbolism. He uses a lot of light and dark imagery and symbolism. He uses a lot of bird symbolism, which we've been seeing throughout the unit previously that we studied to this. So just look alive, look things up if you're not sure, and you can always just kind of, when you see a significant word, like if you see something about a bird in a poem, you can just off to the side, you can make a little list of the different things that birds can represent. If you're thinking of eagles, then it can represent freedom. If you're thinking of ravens, it can represent mystery. If you're thinking of crows, they can represent death. If you're thinking of owls, it can represent wisdom. So that's always a way. That's a way for you to tackle the symbolism if you're not really sure where it's going. You can just list all the things that you can think of. So your job for each of these Rubaiyat are to do a mini TP cast for each one, and then you need to answer questions on structure that follow in the packet. For example, real fast, the questions that come with the Rubaiyat that we just did, what's the problem or the situation identified in the first two lines? And so, with them the seed of wisdom did I sow, and with my own hand labored it to grow. So he's working with a group of people, and he's trying to make them wise. the tension or the surprise in the third line. And this was all the harvest that I reaped. So we're getting a hint that he did get a harvest. He did reap a harvest there. He did learn something from the experience. And the resolution, I came like water and like wind I go. And depending on how, you wanted to translate it, either he came refreshed and ready and he left being pushed out of the situation, unhappy with it, or he came kind of empty and then left with experience. So it's just however you want to interpret it. And then there's an additional question in your packet on this one. What comment is the last line making about well-educated people in their own search for wisdom? And so when I look at it that way, it kind of makes sense to think, that you're not always pleased with what you learn, that sometimes knowledge can be a little bit of a burden, or when you put too much pressure on gaining wisdom, you can be a little disappointed or gain wisdom that maybe you didn't really want to begin with. So the only other thing that each Rubai question set asks you is to create an alternate title for that Rubai. And so that's a place for you to be a little more creative, but you want to make a title that relates to what you gained. Maybe link it to the theme or link it to an interesting word that you saw within the poem. I'm going to leave that one blank for you to see what you come up with. And also feel free when you get to it to run through this poem your own way. You do not have to stick to my interpretation. It's just your interpretation has to be consistent and you have to be able to support it with evidence from the Rubai. So I hope that you guys enjoy these. I think they're really cool. There's always a favorite here and there. So have fun with it and be my little overachievers. Bye.